Dr. Mosconi, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. You are the absolute expert in menopause. We've had so many questions about menopause. Like, what is it? What's it affect on my body, my brain, my hormones? And you've written an entire book on this, all about menopause brain. So can you tell me, what is menopause's effect on our brain?
Yes. So I think the best way to answer your question is to first acknowledge that as a society, we've only understood half of what menopause is all about, which is really the impact of menopause on reproduction and the woman's fertility. And most women, most individuals do have this notion that at some point a woman will stop having a menstrual cycle, and that's the end of her ability to have children. What is never acknowledged is that menopause is actually a neurologically active state. It's a transition that impacts your brain just as much as it does the ovaries. It impacts your body as well in so many ways that are just not really fully acknowledged or addressed. But the impact of menopause on the brain specifically has been completely overlooked in medicine, has been downplayed in medicine, and women have been nothing short of ridiculed for having a reproductive period and having a reproductive life and for going through menopause. So the book is really about clarifying what menopause is and isn't, with a strong focus on the impact of menopause on the brain, on brain health, cognitive health, and mental health for all women.
Oh, I feel like we have been done such a disservice. And we were talking before the podcast about what we learn about our bodies and our reproductive health in childhood. I remember in 5th grade having a 30-minute session around what my period was, and that was it. I was sort of left to my own devices. And now we, in my 40s, I am looking kind of at the horizon going, well, what is menopause? And that's what you do in the book. And so I really want to give the audience the 101. Like, what is menopause? What is perimenopause? What is menopause? What are the symptoms? When does it start? Like, let's get into the details so I can arm this audience with as much information as possible to know, maybe they're feeling like more depressed or anxious than they ever have. And they think like, oh, this is just my job or it's my kids. But what if it's perimenopause or menopause?
Yes. And, this is such a good point. And I like to mention that I also received no training in menopause. And I have a lot of friends who work in OBGYN, and they say that when they went to medical school and then did their residency in OBGYN, they basically received no training in menopause care, maybe a few hours here and there. Wow. I want to add the no brain specialist receives any time at all on menopause. I don't think there was even a chapter on menopause in all. I have 24, 25 years of formal education. And everything I know about menopause, I had to find out myself. It was really because of my research and the implications, I basically taught myself all the things I needed to know about menopause. And then by talking with other specialists and really adopting an integrative look at menopause. And the way the menopause is described in clinical practice is really only based on reproductive function and on whether or not you have a menstrual cycle. But if we want a more comprehensive definition that I think is much more helpful as a woman and as a future menopausal patient, I think we really need to bring the brain into the conversation. So if you're okay with this, we can look at menopause first in terms of a timeline, the way that it is clinically defined. But then we can layer up on top of that and make it more comprehensive and clearer so that everyone can get a better sense of what to expect, not just as you go through it, but also after, right? So the problem, I think, with the clinical framework that we use to define menopause is that it sounds almost like it's one day on the calendar. Like one day you wake up one morning, your period is gone, that is menopause, and now you're postmenopausal. Like puberty, right? We're made to believe that one day you get your period, and now you are effectively a woman, right? And then one day your period would end, and you will be in menopause. And really, one can wish that things were that simple, but they're not. In reality, menopause is a process. From a scientific perspective, we define menopause as a neuroendocrine transition state, which means that your brain, your neural system, your neurological system is changing together with your endocrine system. Right? So your brain and your ovaries and the connection between the two, which is the neuroendocrine system, is changing, is evolving. And this change doesn't happen overnight. It actually happens gradually over between 10 and 20 years. So it's a very lengthy, it can be a fairly lengthy process. So to map it out, we start at puberty. We get the menstrual cycle. Within a few years, the menstrual cycle stabilizes. And then it's usually fairly regular over time. It's never 100% the same length or the same intensity or the same severity, but more or less it's predictable. So for as long as you have a predictable menstrual cycle, that you are in the premenopausal phase. Anything before menopause. Now, clinically, once we reach 30, 35 years of age, that's when we start using the term premenopausal. So at that point, you're a premenopausal woman. And for as long as you have a very regular menstrual cycle, that's the early premenopausal phase. At some point, every woman will experience a change, either in frequency or in length or in severity. So let's say that you used to have a fairly regular cycle of 28, maybe 30 days. Next month, it could be 25. The following month, it could be 26. Then maybe it's again 28, 29. Then one month, it may be 35. That's the late premenopausal stage, when your cycle is still regular, but you start noticing some changes. Sometimes a little shorter, sometimes it's a little longer, or sometimes maybe a little bit heavier or a little bit lighter. You yourself can tell that it's not the way it used to be, but it's still there and it's still predictable. Late premenopausal phase. What can you experience at that point as a woman? Typically, sleep changes. That's when sleep starts being a little bit less consistent. Maybe some women tend to wake up around 2 or 3 in the morning, or they have a hard time falling back asleep or falling asleep at night. Sleep disturbances are a fairly common symptom at that time, which is in part related to hormones, in part related to something else. But it is a measurable symptom to keep your eyes on, because something that I hear a lot, and I can speak to personal experience, is that something may happen around your cycle that is a little bit of a clue that you're about to have your cycle. Like for me, I get a headache 2 or 3 days prior. For some of our patients, they can't sleep at night. I have actually some friends of mine who just cannot sleep 2 nights before their cycle arrives. And that's important to know, because it gives you a little bit of a preview of something that may go awry as you actually go through menopause. So something to watch out for and to think about. What can I do to make it better for myself? So that's the late premenopausal phase. Then the cycle starts skipping. So you start skipping periods. At first, it's just one period once in a while. But as long as you still have a menstrual cycle within a 3 months window, that is the early perimenopausal phase. And things at that point, you may start feeling foggy-brained. That's something a lot of people mention. And we know that clinically as well. And then mood can start changing. You may be a little bit more irritable. You may be a little bit short-tempered, or you may be a little bit sad sometimes after ovulation. You may feel a change in your usual mood. And sometimes some of our patients at least report that they start feeling less like themselves. And this is a common theme in menopause, how you don't feel like yourself at times. And that usually precedes the typical signs of menopause, like the hot flashes and the night sweats, right? So the brain symptoms sometimes may actually precede ovarian symptoms.
Wow.
Because only in the late perimenopausal stage do clinicians start to think about you as actually being close to menopause, right? At that point, the late perimenopausal stage is defined as not having a period for more than 3 months in a row, but you still have one in a year.
I see.
Yes.
How long can that last for people?
So early and late perimenopause together can last between 2 and 14 years. The average is 7.
Okay.
Yeah. In the late perimenopausal stage, once you are at that point, when you have, let's say, your menstrual cycle is spaced by more than 3 months apart, then you can reasonably predict that your final menstrual cycle would be 3 years from now, or maximum 5, but usually 2-3 years.
Okay. And that's about the time doctors start supporting you through it, when you're feeling
Hopefully, many physicians wait until you no longer have a menstrual cycle. And there's a movement today to raise awareness that actually most women have more concerns and more symptoms in the late perimenopausal phase, when you still have a menstrual cycle, but it's quite irregular. And that's really when the symptoms of menopause are most pronounced for most women. So the hot flashes really kick in. The night sweats can keep you up at night, and sleep disturbances are worst at that point of the menopause transition. The brain fog is a concern for over 2/3 of all perimenopausal women, and mood changes are quite likely as well. So I think if once we're able to bring brain specialists in the mix, or at least make it clear that the brain symptoms really need attention, then I think we'll be able to really support women, because at least from a scientific perspective, is the transition that needs addressing, right? That's when you need the most support, because that's the time where your body and your brains are transitioning basically to a new biology. And yes, this is a genetically clued process. It is a natural, in quotes, process. It's a physiological event, but there are risks and there are concerns, and it's a lengthy process, and it's not a picnic for many women. Some women just breeze through it, but they're a minority. For most women, this is a period where you need support, and you need to be able to support yourself. So that would be the best time to start engaging in menopause care. Because then what happens is that you reach the final menstrual period, which means menopause. So menopause is actually a diagnosis. It's the 12 consecutive months without any menstrual cycles. Let's say that then you get one the following month, which can happen. Boom, you're back in perimenopause, and you need to wait another 12 months to be fully menopausal, which is very unusual in medicine. It's a very strange way to diagnose anything, that you have to wait 12 months. Why? But that's the way it's done. So at that point, after that very special day, you are in the postmenopausal phase of your life that will last for the rest of your life, right? Once you're postmenopausal forever. But there's an early postmenopausal phase, and then there's a late postmenopausal phase. And the early phase is, let's say, between 4 and 6 years past the final menstrual cycle. As the early postmenopausal phase. And it can be as rough or as demanding as the late perimenopausal phase. So let's say the 8 to 12 years around the final menstrual period are the most vulnerable, sometimes most challenging years for most women, because there are the hot flashes, the night sweats, the brain fog, and all these different symptoms of menopause. And then once you're past it, in the late postmenopausal phase, typically the symptoms tend to go away spontaneously. And for women who do not experience a rebound or an amelioration of symptoms, then it's really important to talk about interventions, prevention, and different types of care.
So let's talk about those 8 to 12 years, because that's a long time of someone's life to feel lost at sea, to feel brain fog, to have all of these sort of physical symptoms that are debilitating for sleep. And I can know, just as a mom who's had 3 children and probably like a real hard time with sleep for a number of years, like to think about having that kind of lack of sleep again is very scary for me. And to think, how would I even be able to show up emotionally and support my family and my boys when they're, teenagers in high school. So if you could wave a magic wand for those 8 years with, I know you do it with your patients, but if you could wave a magic wand, what do we do to support them on that transition? Like, let's say money's no object and you can use supplements, hormone replacement therapy, physical exercise, sleep hygiene. Like, what is it for you that really makes this transition better, not so debilitating for people for so long?
Yeah. Well, so that was an average, right? The 8 years is a ballpark. There are women who really have no trouble at all. And there are women who experience a very fast transition. It could be maybe 1-2 years. I think what's important to realize is that there's a range of response that's not been really formalized in medicine, where every woman has a special and quite unique journey. And I think our job as scientists and clinicians is double-fold. There's clinical care, and then there's really better understanding the process. So I think it's important to really speak to every woman as an individual and understand your own risks and concerns, and then explore the entire range of solutions that are available to us, while also doing more research to formalize the fact that different women experience menopause quite differently. So for instance, after having a baby, it is now understood that the neuroendocrine system is in transition, right? Puberty, pregnancy, menopause, they're pretty much the same process from a neurological perspective, where your brain is involved and is going through a change that is wonderful for many, many reasons, and I know we'll talk more about it, but that change also comes with risks. For instance, depressive symptoms. And we now understand that many women going through pregnancy and then motherhood don't have any mood changes postpartum. But many other women do. And those can range from the baby blues, when they're quite mild and they go away within a certain number of months, or hopefully months rather than years. But then some women have actual depression, postpartum depression. And then a few women have something called postpartum psychosis, which is a very debilitating condition that requires very specific care. So it took forever to get to this point. It wasn't until 1994 the postpartum depression was actually recognized as an actual medical entity. But now they were finally there. That means that new moms go to the pediatrician, right, to have their babies checked, and the moms get tested for depression as well, which is perfect, because as soon as you understand that there's actual depression affecting the mothers, then we can really provide care and also develop very specific treatments that are now available that are specific to postpartum depression, which is not the same thing as major depression or serotonin-induced depression or other types of depression. This fine-tuning of diagnosis is just not present at all for menopause. There's no range, there's no understanding that different women may have more or less severe symptoms. So this is something that I get really upset when I think about this, but it's something that we need to study better and really bring it to the table and say we need to develop different tools that are specific to every woman's concern. That said, what do we have to work with, assuming that money is no concern and that we have access to proper medical care? There are different types of interventions that can be used or not used, depending on very specific risks and preference, right? Because different women have a different level of risk tolerance, and also they have different beliefs, for instance. So there are pharmacological options, like hormone replacement therapy. There are different types of hormone replacement therapy, different options that we can play with and try and see which one works best for you. Then there are non-hormonal options as well, and there are quite a few. And then there are obviously behavioral options that are recommended by professional societies, so I take them very seriously. And then we have lifestyle adjustments. And for me, as a woman, as a scientist, as I'm directing the Women's Brain Initiative at Weill Cornell, so I really want to make sure that we explain all these different options to our patients and then work with them to come up with the best treatment plan that is not just effective, but also sustainable, right? What do you want to talk about first?
Let's jump into hormone replacement therapy, because for a long time, there was a large fear around hormones causing the growth of cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer. And it feels like overnight in the last year, it's
right?
Totally debunked. And why are we making all these women suffer? So can you talk me through like how hormone replacement therapy is used for you and your patients, and what it's really doing in the body? Because I know, when it comes to birth control, you're shutting down your body's hormonal system. You're basically putting it in sleep mode for however long you're taking that. How is that working? How is it working when we're using hormone replacement therapy? Is it putting off menopause? Is it just giving you the benefits of having more hormones? Like, what's really happening there?
So hormone replacement therapy is available in different forms. And I think the main distinction is actually whether or not a woman has a uterus, which may seem strange, but in truth, 1 in every 9 American women undergoes a hysterectomy, which is the surgical removal of the uterus with or without the ovaries, often before going through menopause. And this procedure makes it tricky to really appreciate where you are on the menopause map, because if you don't have a uterus, you do not bleed, right? There's no way to tell if you have a menstrual cycle. I mean, you don't have a menstrual cycle, but you may still be ovulating if you have your ovaries. Now, most women do have a uterus. In that case, you more likely than not, it would be helpful to take an estrogen together with a progestogen. Why? Because estrogen alone does promote the growth of cells in reproductive tissues, especially the endometrium, and that may increase the risk of endometrial cancer if the estrogen is taken alone. I'll just say that the increase in risk is very small, right? When we talk about increased risk of cancer, we just think about it in absolute terms. I think it's always good to remind everyone that we're actually looking at relative data, right? And so the absolute risk increase is actually small. However, it is best, it's considered good practice to prescribe an estrogen together with a progestogen. Even the words here are interesting. And the thing is, sometimes the terminology can be a little bit vague or confusing, right? Estrogen is not just one hormone. It's an umbrella term for many different types of hormones. And the one that we're trying to replace is called 17-beta estradiol. And estradiol is the most bioavailable, is the most potent type of estrogen that the ovaries produce during a reproductive life. I will add that the brain can also make its own estradiol, And I have something to tell you about this later, the surprise. But so the type of estrogen that is mostly used right now is called micronized estradiol, and is also known as bioidentical, or bioidentical in England. But it's basically a molecular replica of the estradiol that the ovaries make. So it's a very specific hormone, which is like a supplement at that point. It doesn't shut down anything, but it works like your own estradiol. And the way it works is like this. The hormones alone don't quite matter. What matters most is the combination of the hormone with the hormonal receptor. So think about it like a key and the lock in a door, where the hormone is the key and the receptor is the lock. And what you want is for the key to to turn on the lock so you can open the door, because it's really the door opening that leads to all the wonderful things that estrogen can do for you. From a brain perspective, that is neuroplasticity, is neuroprotection, is growth of new dendritic arbors, and it's increased energy production, increased blood flow to the brain, reduced inflammation, reduced oxidative stress. So there's a lot of beautiful things that can happen if the hormone is able to open that door. You need to have both. What happens in menopause is that estradiol starts fluctuating very widely during perimenopause and then bottoms out after the final menstrual period. So what happens during the menopause transition, and it's one of the reasons that women can have all these symptoms, is that the receptors don't know what to do. Because 1 second you have a ton of estradiol, and 1 second you have none. So the receptors can get really frazzled, if you will, just trying to catch whatever. Right, yeah.
Downregulate, regulate. They're like, we don't need this much. We downregulate. We need more. We upregulate.
Yes.
Okay.
Because they work in balance, right? You want a certain amount of estrogen to a certain amount of receptors. But if you have too much estrogen, then your cells will produce fewer receptors, which is a very active process. But if you don't have the estradiol, then your DNA is going to be, oh my God, let's put all the receptors out there so that I can grab whatever's left. So in that case, replacing estradiol acts like a supplement to stabilize the concentration, because you don't want the fluctuation, right, over time. So you just want the concentration to remain relatively stable so that the receptors don't have to go nuts, trying to compensate. And after menopause, it's not just stabilization, but it's also supplementation, because at that point, your estradiol is permanently low. And you want to reach a certain amount so that your receptors are saturated. And then they're happy and the door can stay open, right?
Yeah. Just thinking about the symptoms or all of the benefits that you just ticked off for fighting oxidative stress and inflammation and I want all those benefits. I want to keep that like estradiol stable, or at least have a foundation so that I'm not bottoming out throughout transition and postmenopausal. It seems sort of like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah. I agree, but it's not. Evidently, it's not. And I think what happened is that there was this disastrous clinical trial, called the Women's Health Initiative, where they were testing a different type of hormones, entirely different. They're called CEEs, conjugated equine estrogens, which are predominantly estrone, and there's just a little bit of estradiol. So they're not bioidentical, for whatever that means. They're still very helpful. They're just a different type of mechanism that is maybe less well understood than estradiol in some ways. And they were used in very high doses of the CEEs delivered by mouth, whereas now we tend to go transdermal, which is a little bit more gentle as an approach, because you bypass the liver. And by bypassing the liver, there's a lower risk of blood clots or other things that can be released in the circulation. So that's helpful for women, for instance, who have cardiovascular issues or are at risk for blood clotting. I don't have anything against oral estrogens as well. I think they're getting a little bit of a bad rap right now, still because of the Women's Health Initiative. It's just important to understand what we're trying to do, how we're trying to do it, and whether or not it's the right thing to do for you as a person. And then progestin. So estrogen, if you don't have a uterus, then it's safe to take estrogen on its own. Mm-hmm. Although some of us argue that progesterone also has benefits that are above and beyond its ability to keep the risk of endometrial cancer down, right? It really helps with sleep. It's a very important neuroprotective hormone as well. So I would love to see more research on progesterone, not just to balance out the estrogen, but as an actual treatment. I think that would be really helpful. And when we use the word progestogen, that's the larger class of compounds that have the progestogenic action. Typically, so in the past, most progestogens were synthetic. And so that's called the progestin. Mm-hmm. And the progestin, some specific types of progestins are really what's been linked to the increased risk of breast cancer in the Women's Health Initiative and to some other vascular issues. Right now, most healthcare professionals will go with micronized progesterone or just progesterone, which is exactly the same hormone that the ovaries make during a reproductive life. So I think we have more options this day. We know the nuances better. We know that the Women's Health Initiative was using possibly some hormones like MPA, which is a synthetic progestin that's later on been found to increase the risk of cardiovascular risk for some women. But most importantly, the Women's Health Initiative was looking at women who were in their 70s or 80s. They were like decades past the menopause transition, which is really when your system is receptive to hormones. So it makes more sense scientifically, but I would say clinically as well, to really focus on this window of opportunity, which is a few years prior to the final menstrual period, and certainly up to 10 years after that, because that's when your body and brain, they're still changing. Mm-hmm. And that's when your hormones are kind of fluctuating up and down, and you want to stabilize them. Mm-hmm. So you're not postponing menopause, you're supporting your body and your brain as you go through it. And the idea is to alleviate the symptoms while also potentially supporting the health of your brain and your body for the long term. Sure.
Absolutely. I would think supporting your brain specifically in that perimenopausal phase is critically important. I mean, so many women are having babies later. I'm about myself and a lot of my friends who've had their children in their late 30s, early 40s. And to think,
that's a strong predictor of life expectancy. Did you see that new study?
Study.
Wonderful.
I was trying to make it past 100. Here I go. Yeah, we all want to stay alive for our babies, so we just keep going. Well, I'm curious, actually. I get blood draws every year from my functional MD. I work, to kind of do a once-over and check in on myself. Things like inflammation levels, homocysteine, interleukin-6, C-reactive protein. Yeah. I do cardiovascular, metabolic, and thyroid. I'm curious when it comes to the hormone piece, what should I be looking for? What should women be looking for when they are trying to understand if they are, going into perimenopause or late stage menopausal outside of period? I would say I'm been very regular my whole life when it comes to my period. And when it comes to personal symptoms, whether it be like, low back pain during pregnancy or old soccer injury, or I kind of push through it. I'm a lot like my mom. She's the same way. She's probably needed like a knee replacement for, I don't know, over a decade. And she's like, it's fine, Kelly. I can't sit down for like the recovery of that. They say it's a year, but I think like, wow, you could be out of pain, but I'm just like her. I'll just push through. And I worry for so many of us who are very busy working, young children, that we're missing symptoms because we're just go. So what from like an annual blood draw perspective should we be tracking when it comes to hormones, or are you doing it through like a Dutch analysis, like urine or something like that?
The Dutch test is actually not recommended. I know it's very popular, but the best way to measure hormones is from blood tests. It is the gold standard. And I know, there have been validation studies, and I wouldn't say that I'm against anything. It's just from a clinical perspective, we believe that the CLIA certified, blood oil is just better.
It's good for listening, because if they have insurance, they can just get it done with their gyno or OB.
Yes. Yeah, it's an easy thing to do for sure. Hormones in blood can only take you this far. So there are situations where they're definitely helpful. For instance, for women who are having menstrual irregularities at a young age, for women with PCOS, for women with primary ovarian insufficiency, for women with very specific endometriosis, very specific symptoms and concerns. Then you do specific types of blood tests to try and understand what's happening and to reach an accurate diagnosis, right, as best you can. And that's important because it may lead to one treatment plan over another. Women who had hysterectomies, for instance, you can't tell me whether or not you have a menstrual cycle, but your ovaries are still active and cycling. So at least from blood tests, you can measure the levels of specific hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, AMH, the anti-Müllerian hormone, and other hormones that are helpful to make a diagnosis of menopause. We can also use blood work to be sure that a woman who no longer has a menstrual cycle is effectively in menopause. When your estradiol is like below 32, there's some kind of cutoff that we can look at. Other than that, blood work can't do that much for you, to be honest. And there are two things that you can't quite do with this kind of blood test. The first one, they can't tell you if you are approaching menopause or not, because the perimenopausal window is so unpredictable that if I test you at 9 a.m. in the morning, you'll have a different value than if I test you 5 p.m. at night the same day. Right. So it would be best to repeat the test multiple times, do an average, and it becomes a little bit of a hassle. The other thing is that hormones in blood have no correlation with hormones in brain. Because the brain has its own system where it's able to produce many of its own hormones inside the head. So the two systems speak to each other. Obviously, they're in communication with each other, but hormones in blood do not predict, for instance, the symptoms of menopause. So in 2019, I went to my radiochemistry department. I specialize in brain imaging. I have a PhD in neuroscience and nuclear medicine, so I do all this brain work. I love brain imaging and brain scans. And I went to my radiochemistry department and I said, I want to measure estrogen in the brain. Right?
Yeah, let's do that.
It's obvious. And what did they say to me? Well, you can't. I said, because? There's no way to do it. There's no technique, there's no methodology that allows us to measure any hormones in the living human brain. The only way is postmortem or in animals, basically. But you can't do it. Like, you can't come to my office and say, can you measure estrogen in my brain? Until very recently, the answer would have been, well, sorry, I can't. Yes. So I said, well, is it just us here, Weill Cornell Medicine and YP, which sounds weird because we're really good at this kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Or is everybody? And they're like, no, it's everybody. There's just no way to do that. And they say, well, you know what? This is unacceptable. We're going to. So we raised the funds, and huge shout out to Maria Shriver and the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, who really helped us enormously to get this project off the ground. And they funded the first round of development and testing, which, oh my goodness, she's such a blessing. Maria is just like an absolute angel. And this was huge for us. And then in 2020, we got FDA approval to use their technique. Then, of course, we got shut down for COVID for a long time. But we finally have completed, well, 2 studies, but we now have our first publication coming out June 20th.
The day of the podcast release.
That's perfect. Let me get back to you on the final date. Once I have the final date from the journal. But yes, it's coming out in Scientific Reports, which is a Nature journal, and this the fifth most cited journal in the world. So I'm very happy about the exposure. And it's open access, which I really like, so that anyone can look at it. In fact, the most people download it, the more likely the journal is going to be to publish more studies that look at menopause and women's brain health and whatnot. But so this is the first time, to my knowledge, this is the first time in history that anyone's ever measured or mapped out hormones in the brain. Wow. in humans who are alive. So I think this is huge. I find it bizarre that it had not been done before. I know people have been trying for a long time, but this is the first time they were succeeding at doing this. I'm really, really happy. I'm very proud also. I can't even begin to tell you the amount of headaches I got from this project. I mean, it's been 5 years of my life and 5 years of one headache after the next. But we're very happy that it works well. I'll show you the brain scans later. I'll send you the brain scans. And why is this important? For two things. Number one, because now we're actually understanding what happens in women's brains. And the shortest possible explanation is that the receptors that we were talking about before, they're actually upregulated as we go through menopause. So we can see that the brain is actually wanting estrogen. The brain is active, it's plastic, it's not shutting down after menopause, right? The ovaries are. Yeah. Estrogen production from the ovaries is going down, but the brain is actually asking for estrogen. It wants it still, which really speaks to the fact that it makes sense to supplement, or at least it makes sense to use this technique to test what happens as you supplement hormones to a brain that is clearly wanting the hormones, which I think is very exciting.
Wow. So we know that the bioidentical hormones, the estradiol that our ovaries make, can cross the blood-brain barrier into the brain and attach to the receptors and brain cells. Wow.
Yeah. And actually, so the tracer that we are using is exactly that. It's estradiol. We can call it bioidentical estradiol that goes into your brain. It's a very small dose. It's a microscopic dose, just enough to attach to the receptors. And then there's a little bit of light that comes out of the brain so that we can take a picture from the outside. And also we do something called kinetic modeling by using some fancy brain imaging protocols, where we can actually quantify the amount of receptors in any given part of the brain. And we find that the way that the estradiol, the hormone, binds to the receptor is actually increased as we go through menopause, which is exactly what we were saying before, that they're just holding on to whatever estrogen you get. You do the best of what you get, right? I find it also, so the other thing that was really important to us is that estrogen levels in the brain predict the symptoms of menopause with quite high accuracy. So we can predict brain fog, presence of brain fog and mood changes, which you can't do any other way. And we can tell who is postmenopausal against who is not with 100% accuracy. And another thing they were showing that you'll say, well, I knew that just from personal experience, but everybody says estrogen is good for memory. It's good for cognitive function. As the estrogen goes down, you have the brain fog, you have the cognitive lapse, the memory lapses, and whatnot. But nobody's ever shown it, right? That's a theory. But in this study, we show a fairly strong association between estrogen in brain and cognitive performance. So I think it's a first step, obviously, but I was like, oh, finally something that's actually helpful and useful.
Wow. Fascinating. Right? Fascinating. I mean, I can only imagine too how you can extrapolate just that technique and imaging the brain and hormone levels in the brain and bring it into other areas of someone's life, whether that be that postpartum anxiety or depression that women can, experience at a very severe level. Just to know, I think there's this onus of the person of like, I need to just get it together. Why do I feel this way? I need to just fix it. And just some real understanding that it's not who you are. It's just a chemical exchange between your hormones and your receptors that are impacting your daily life. And it can be relieved.
Modulated, right? Yes.
Modulated. It's just exciting. Oh my gosh. Like when you think about now being able to have, first of all, I've always known you were brilliant following along, but just so exciting what you're doing for the movement. And I love Maria and friends with her daughter, Catherine. Like I've spoken at at her foundation events in the past, just about blood sugar balance, which is like nowhere. I'm like just nowhere near what you're going to be able to do for just this movement. It's just amazing. And wow, like really, really cool. So when you think about this new technology, your ability to really understand hormone levels in the brain and receptor concentration, like what other studies are you dreaming up with this new?
Oh my goodness.
Like, what do you know? What do you want to study?
Oh, I have so many. So we've already, so this study is really 5 years of my life.
Yeah.
So as we were wrapping up the first part, I was like, we just start the next phase because I could tell that it was working. And we're working on several different things. The first one, the most obvious one, is hormone therapy, right? What happens in the brain as a woman starts taking hormones for menopause, right? So that's the first, perhaps the most complicated thing. The other one, there are so many things I want to do. One thing is for Alzheimer's prevention. So there's this theory. I work in a very strange field. In the field of Alzheimer's disease, there are people who think that sex does not matter at all. And every time we try to say, well, look, there's actual differences in the ways that your brain is or isn't at risk for dementia, depending on whether you're a woman or a man. For so many years, there was such huge pushback where people would just not believe that women are at higher risk, at greater risk for Alzheimer's than men, in part because their brains respond differently to certain things that can happen to you as you go through life, like pregnancy, puberty, menopause, exposure to hormones, like you were saying, birth control. So many women are put on hormones at a fairly young age without anyone having a clue how those hormones actually interact with your receptors in your brain because they just couldn't look at it, right? Now we have a technology, so I would love to look into that as well. And I want to be clear, I'm not pro-hormones. I don't want anyone to feel like I'm pushing hormone therapy on them. I'm anti-suffering.
Yeah.
And I'm pro-solutions. So hormones may or may not be the right solution for every woman, but I think it's really important to understand what they do and what they don't do and how to use them the best possible way. This is what we're trying to do here. The other thing I want to do is to really show or find out whether or not changes in estrogen concentration in their brain is what prompts Alzheimer's pathology in women, which is our theory or many people's theory. And we're doing that already. So I'm very excited about that. We're working on it. And then I really want to find ways to support women who are going through menopause for surgical indications. So I don't know if you know this, but there's like we were saying before, 1 in every 9 American women has a hysterectomy, and almost half of all those women also have an oophorectomy, which is the surgical removal of the ovaries. And for many, many years, I think until 2008, then more definitively around 2015, the general practice was that if you woman went to a doctor because you had endometriosis or because you had you needed to have your uterus taken out for any reason, including benign indications, then the rule was to also take the ovaries out, even if the ovaries were healthy. Now considering, this is again bikini medicine, right? It's just looking at women as reproductive vessels. If you don't need the ovaries, maybe we'll just take them out. Yeah. But we're there. Why? Because that reduces the risk, obviously, of ovarian cancer. If you have no ovaries, you won't. develop ovarian cancer, which makes sense. But if you don't have a high risk for cancer, for ovarian cancer, then that's a very rare outcome.
Right.
But what happens in surgical menopause is that your risk of many other things increase, from increase of depression and anxiety to risk of osteoporosis and cardiovascular disease and even cognitive impairment. Mm-hmm. So a lot of women have really not been counseled enough before undergoing these procedures, in part because nobody actually believes that menopause really changes your brain.
Right.
Or that menopause can put your brain at risk for all these different things. So what we're trying to do now is to provide actual definitive evidence, or hard evidence, that may be or may not be the case, but at least we're looking at it, because there are no studies looking at the brains of women before and after oophorectomy.
Mm-hmm.
Not one.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing that too.
I mean, just in my family, my mom had a hysterectomy, and one of her ovaries was removed and one was spared, and it was, benign fibroids.
Yeah.
And just, this is just easier. We'll cut everything out. And I think about, even a dear friend of mine who had her uterus and her ovaries taken out at 37 years old, and you're just, that is being shoved into menopause, right? I mean, there's just completely shut down, and the symptoms she's had after that weren't really, she wasn't counseled in the effects of that it would have on her at such a young age with young children.
Right. Was it benign? Was it for benign indications? Because it was it was. And she was not offered hormone therapy?
It was, there was a number of ablations that were happening, and it was just
always
a lot of blood loss and complications, but ultimately that's the decision they made.
See, what happens is if you have a history of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, if you're like a BRCA mutation carrier, then undergoing a prophylactic oophorectomy is obviously recommended, because that reduces the risk of ovarian cancer and breast cancer. So it's a wonderful, I don't know if wonderful is the best word, but it's important to know that option is available. Mm-hmm. What I would love to see is counseling being provided on the effects of surgical menopause, especially so for women who get preventative oophorectomies because of cancer considerations, but also women who receive the same kind of procedure for different reasons. Mm-hmm. Because in that case, hormone therapy is not only possible, but it's actually recommended now as of 2022 by professional societies. So I think it's really important to be offered a range of solutions. Now we talked a lot about hormones. There are other things. There are non-hormonal options, and there's behavioral options. The North American Menopause Society really endorses cognitive behavioral therapy and clinical hypnosis, which are things that maybe you wouldn't think about necessarily, right? I have flashes to go to a therapist. Well, evidently, yes, it can be effective. And then, of course, lifestyle is also really important, because diet, exercise, sleep hygiene, and avoiding toxins, environmental toxins and pollution. These are all things that can help support the transition as well. Stress reduction is another big one.
Yeah. What's, I kind of think about it because I work in blood sugar so often I think about it like insulin sensitivity in the same way, because that's the hormone of my daily life and what I'm talking about with people all the time. I'd be curious to know, with your imaging, I don't know that it'd be the first study that you do, but just understanding people's exercise and diet routines and the effect it would have on their hormone receptors in their brain and the inflammation levels in their brain. Just, is there any recommendations you're making without those studies to back it, but what you're seeing clinically is what can we do to smooth the transition in regards to all of the lifestyle factors? What are the big buckets, the biggest recommendations you can make for people to smooth their landing, as we could say?
Yeah. So the estrogen imaging technique is new, but we've done several studies using other brain imaging markers. And we and others have shown quite consistently that there are very specific lifestyle adjustments and interventions that do support brain health. We also looked at women in particular, like midlife women, because that's what I've been doing forever. It's my thing in some ways. And what we found is that usually a combination of a diet that's high in fiber and antioxidants, together with regular physical activity and intellectual stimulation, this combination seems to be, at least in my hands, it's associated with very healthy looking brains in some ways in midlife, where the gray matter is intact and is stable over time, and your brain energy levels are also stable and intact over time. Whereas women who follow like the standard American diet, that is it called the SAD diet, I'm told?
That diet.
That's so fun.
Diet's very sad.
So women who follow this kind of diet is high in processed foods, and everybody knows what that is, and do not really exercise physically or mentally, they have the higher risk of experiencing declines in gray matter volume, declines in brain energy levels, and they're more likely to develop Alzheimer's plaques in their brains already in midlife. And now we're trying to fold menopause in the mix and see how different things can really play out differently when a woman is premenopausal and then when it's postmenopausal. But that requires a huge data set, like huge. So we're working on it.
To come.
But, to come. I think, to your point, insulin resistance and glucose stabilization, I think it's undeniable that is really important for overall health, for hormonal health for sure, and for brain health as well. And I think what really links the three together is fiber, right? And oligosaccharides that are food for the gut microbiome. In part because there's one part of the microbiome that's called the estrobolome, that is specifically recycling estrogen around the circulation. And that could really be the link between hormonal estrogen levels, hormonal health and brain health, and food and diet for women, right? And then the idea that the plant helped me with the plant forward diet, the diet rich in fruits and veggies and fresh produce has been shown time and time again to be really good for your hormones as well as for your brain health and your cardiovascular health. So I think that's something to explore. Tell me now, are you a carnivore? Did I just...
No. My blood sugar, I'm thinking about a couple of patients that I've had with functional MDs who have a bacteria in their gut that cleaves estrogen that should be recycled, and is being reabsorbed. And I was trying to remember the strain of that bacteria, because when we give them a certain supplement that causes the die-off of that specific strain of bacteria, we see a rebalance in their estrogen levels. And I was thinking it was a few years ago. So I was like, what is the name of that? Find it in my brain. No, I am not a carnivore. I do eat red meat and I eat liver. But I wrote in my first book, Body Love, that came out in 2017, about what I call the Fab Four, which is the 4 things that you put on your plate to balance your blood sugar. And it's protein, fat, like healthy fats, avocado, olives, olive oil, fiber. So fiber-based foods at every meal, whether those are your non-starchy vegetables, and then greens or vegetables deep in color. So I'm looking for like leafy greens, herbs, deep berries, because I think when people were focused on blood sugar balance, they didn't really understand how their choices were driving blood sugar up. So we'd look at a plate and just simplify the science by saying, what is it mostly? So if you're looking at a breakfast plate and there's a pancake, berries, syrup, you know, an orange juice, and then a sausage, I'm like, well, Well, let's look for the Fab 4. You've got some protein in the sausage and you've got some color in the berries, but everything else is just a driver of blood sugar. And so there's a lack of balance on the plate. So there'll be a lack of balance in the body. So how can we build from the Fab 4 up and think about our carbohydrate foods as fiber, and leafy greens or vegetables deep in color first? Not saying that all of those other things are always off limits, but there was just simplifying the science of blood sugar so that people could build that plate. And that's what they talked about at Maria's event.
Yes. That's wonderful. It really captures the essence of a healthy diet. It's also balanced. Also, I was kidding when I asked you.
I mean, there's a lot of people doing it right now that the number one fear that, I think they have, where they're like, oh, I feel so good because I'm just eating red meat and egg yolks and maybe some salmon roe. I feel so good and energetic. They're in a ketogenic state probably at this point. There's a lot of nutrient density if they're having pasture-raised animals, bioavailable fat-soluble vitamins, B vitamins, all of the protein that their body would need. But that's the fear that when I have a client who asks me about that diet, well, what about my microbiome? What about the antioxidants and phytonutrients from plants? I haven't ever gone all in on it, but I have had clients and functional MDs where we put them on a elimination diet due to certain reasons. And it's sort of in that vein, but we always, it's never long-term and it's always, ending where we're bringing back a lot of fiber-based foods and working up their tolerance. I think especially too with a lot of, I don't know if I'm sure you're versed in SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. There's a lot of testing for that. And when people test positive for that, they have a fear of fiber and the FODMAPs. Very seriously, they remove all of those fiber-based foods and then they're afraid of a relapse. And so we're working to increase tolerance of fiber-based foods for patients most often. So, yeah.
Isn't that interesting how very select bacteria can really have such an impact on our behavior and our beliefs? Yeah. So my husband just gave the commencement speech at Cooper Union the other day, and nobody was expecting him to talk about microbiology, but he just did it. Yeah. And he was talking about some specific bacteria that we don't know that we might have in our bodies, our brains, our guts. They really make us make weird choices. And I know this is for another conversation, but I just thought about toxoplasmosis. That's what I was talking about as you were mentioning in the test. I was like, oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'm so impressed with all that you've done. And I don't want this podcast to end without you talking a little bit about your career and what you've got so excited about it and how it's changed over time and the research you've done and your practice. Can you talk a little bit about how you went down this rabbit hole towards brain imaging and inventing or an ability to look at hormone receptors and hormones in the brain? I mean, that doesn't happen overnight. It's been years and years and years, but
I think it's been most of my life. I was born in a family of scientists where both my parents are nuclear physicists, both of them, and they don't look like nuclear physicists, but that's a stereotype, so I'm not gonna say. But they sure act like nuclear physicists. So I think I was maybe 6 when I knew a lot about Einstein and relativity and gravity and whatnot, and I had no idea who Cinderella was. So that was interesting in grade school. But I'm just so fascinated with chemistry and biology. I've always been, ever since I was very little. And when I was 18, I announced, I was born and raised in Italy, in Florence. And for whatever kind of serendipity, when I was 18, that was the first year that the only university we have in Florence offered neuroscience as a coursework. And if you pick that, then you have 5 years of neuroscience only. It's really a deep dive. And of course, it was that's it. That's me. I'm doing this. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And then I was fortunate that my mom was teaching nuclear physics to students who then transitioned to nuclear medicine. And so I really knew them for a very, very long time. They would babysit me when I was little, and they were very involved in my upbringing. I would finish what I was studying and whatnot, middle school and then high school, and then I would go to my parents' office in the afternoon to do my homework. And so I was with them, and everybody was talking to me about nuclear physics and cyclotrons. And so by the time I was done with college, I was like, well, I'm ready and I'm here. And the nuclear medicine, my colleagues in nuclear medicine was like, well, welcome, here's your desk. They knew that they could give me a chance, if nothing else. Mm-hmm. And I really worked my butt off really, really a lot to really show to them that I was good enough to work with them. They're very strict. Mm-hmm. They're really very old-fashioned scholars, where the first thing that they did was to give me my mentor, Dr. Alberto Pupi. He gave me this enormous statistical textbook saying, I am sure you don't know anything about statistics. Boom, enjoy. And he's like, do not even come back until all of this stuff is clear. And I wasn't even a PhD student back then. I was still doing my rotations in neurology and psychiatry. And then fortunately, I got into the PhD program. It's a competition. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of applicants, but I made it. I was very happy about that. And then they shipped me off to New York. Like, that's it, go. You have to learn, you have to do more, you have to grow. And so I went to NYU Medical. And I worked with Dr. Moni de Leon, who's one of the pioneers in the field of Alzheimer's prevention, and was very open about the notion of sex differences in Alzheimer's. And then I got in tenure track at NYU until I moved to Weill Cornell in 2016, 2017, because they recruited me. They reached out because they had the first Alzheimer's prevention clinic in the country. That was funded by Dr. Richard Isaacson, who's wonderful. And I started working with him, but then I was like, we have grants, we have projects. I really want to focus on women's brains. And so I launched the Women's Brain Initiative, which is NIH funded. It's an NIH funded clinical research program that very unapologetically is focused on women's brains. And then from that, we expanded into the Alzheimer's prevention program. That includes, I took over the clinic when Richard left. And so now I have the Women's Brain Initiative, the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinic, and the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinical Trials Unit, which I launched 2 years ago. And we have over 80 internal and external collaborators. We're a big team. And they're nice. Everybody's just nice, collegial, just wanting to do good work with good energy. We don't have any diva.
It's amazing.
And everyone was, such a blessing. We had a couple who thankfully left. No, everybody's just wonderful to work with. And I think we're all really motivated and we just want to help others. I think that's the bottom line. We're mostly women. I would say 90% in my immediate team, women. And we just really want to help other women. We just, for personal reasons or other reasons, we have been exposed to the way that women are treated in this kind of medical establishment, and the fact that women's health and women's brain health remains one of the most under-researched, underdiagnosed, and undertreated fields of medicine. And someone needs to fix it, or at least help fix it.
I feel like I have full body chills. I'm so thankful for your work, for you spearheading this work, and for being unapologetic. I think so many times women are labeled for being dramatic or having bigger emotions than we should. And we go through a lot of changes in our life. We have this layer of major hormonal shifts through puberty, pregnancy, for many women, sometimes multiple pregnancies, perimenopause, menopause, and we're now even, we're leading these big careers and we have big missions ahead of us, and we need our brain health. We need our hormones. And I'm just so in gratitude to you for doing this work, because I know because of you, the women listening don't have to suffer as much. And I know for me, I have a little bit of a runway, and I'm so thankful. I'm so excited about what you are going to discover for all of us before that time comes. I don't want people suffering. Like I want everyone as healthy as they can be and armed and equipped with the knowledge to feel empowered to make informed consent decisions over how they can live their best life. And because of you, we're able to do that. So thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lisa Mosconi, for being here, for sharing all of your knowledge, your big, beautiful brain with all of I'm so excited about your new book, and it's called The Menopause Brain for anyone who would like to read it. I'm so excited about what this new imaging will allow for you to discover for all of us. And I want everyone to follow along with your work. So where can people follow along? Where can they get the book? Where can they learn more?
So I do use Instagram. I tried other platforms like Twitter, and I was like, I just emotionally cannot handle this. So Instagram works. Yeah. My handle is Dr. Mosconi, so Dr_Mosconi. I also have a website. It's lisamosconi.com. And the book is everywhere books are, on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles. Yeah, online.
We'll link to all of it, your Instagram, your website, and your new book. Thank you for taking the time to write it outside of your busy schedule.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah, that was interesting. I'm so glad that I did, because the response has been really, really positive, and it's now translated. It's being translated in more than 20 languages. I mean, it goes in more than 20 countries. So I'm really very humbled by that, but also really happy that people find it helpful. Evidently,
it's the class we all needed that we never got in school, and we don't know, like you said earlier in this podcast, for majority of women, they think it's an on and off switch, just like when you go through puberty and you get your period, you think, oh, well, now my period's gone. But it's all of these symptoms that affect their day-to-day life, their relationships, their body image, their ability to
have confidence,
show up. But beyond that, I think about, just everything you said about estradiol, fighting oxidative stress and keeping
Yes, it's a wonderful hormone. I think it's been really, downplayed or overlooked, because we only think about the risks. We never think about the benefits. Mm-hmm. So yeah, no, absolutely. We need this information. If you think about it, when you go through puberty, everybody's happy. Now you're a woman, you can do wonderful things. Then you get pregnant, you have kids, and it's amazing. Obviously, everybody's so happy. There's baby showers and all this beautiful celebration. And then you go through menopause and nobody cares. Right? There's no sense of accomplishment, even personally. There's no sense of having achieved something, or there's something else to look forward to, which is all the rest of your life. Another 30% or so of your life will be after this window. So we cannot collectively as women think of menopause as this doom and gloom thing that just happens to you. You have to fight it off and overcome it. How about embrace it? And just understand why it's happening, what is happening, that there are solutions, and that you can have a very fulfilling rest of your life, regardless of whether or not you're going to have more children. So I think as women, we really need to give ourselves more credit and to be really proud of everything that our bodies and brains have accomplished and can accomplish at any age and any state and walk of life. Right?
Beautiful way to look at it, as an accomplishment, and to see it as an upside. Yes. Not give up on your dreams and the rest of your 30% of your life. Like, get out there and do something amazing with it.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here, Lisa. I really appreciate it. I will continue to follow your work and share it as a megaphone for all that you're doing. So thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate you.
I appreciate you.